All right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Love and Relo, the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, and I am so blessed and honored to be here today with my friend Sheryll Young, the chair of the Idea Taskforce at Worldwide ERC. Sheryll, how are you doing today?
I am well. Thank you kindly. And yourself?
I'm fantastic. Better late
Sorry, I'm
than
late.
never. We are
Better late than
here.
never.
We are here for everyone. People are tuning in, asking what's going on. People are getting excited. We're tantalizing them, teasing them, keeping them waiting with bated breath. Whatever that means.
Apologies.
Look at it. Richard from London is in the house here. Corinne Mossman. Everyone's wild speculation in the comments about what's happening. It's great. Hey, Corinne, thanks for being patient, everybody. Hit that like button. Let everybody know we are indeed live here on Love and Relo today, talking to Sheryll Young. We're going to be talking about the Idea Taskforce that Worldwide ERC has established. How can we all come together to create spaces and opportunities and inclusive scenarios for in global mobility, community. Appreciate everybody out here who stay tuned with us. This is awesome. Yeah, we got music to pay. Yes, there you go. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate you. Microsoft could use your services. We got people in Dallas in the house. This is great. Fantastic. Where in the world are you right now, Sheryll?
I am in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. That makes sense. And I'm in the somewhat small suburb of Oakville, Ontario, where our office is located.
Nice.
Have you ever been?
I've been, no, I've never been to Oakville. I've never been to Toronto. I've been to Montreal a couple times. Let me ask you this.
5-hour drive from Montreal to where I am.
Sell me on a trip to Toronto. What do I need to do? Okay, I love to travel. I'm very sheltered. I need to get out more. Why should I come to Toronto?
You just must. You just have to explore. It's just a to-do thing. You cannot finish your life existence without coming to Toronto. That's just the way this works.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a better question because I need to up my game. Okay, and I'm going to ask the audience the same question because we have a little fun on this show. Okay, this is not dry and reload. This is love and reload. We have fun on the show. Better question, Sheryll. Kingston or Toronto?
Kingston, Ontario, or Kingston, Jamaica?
Kingston, Jamaica.
Jamaica, come on, stop it. But funny story. I'm not from Kingston, so I'm gonna challenge you on that. We've got a number of different parishes, and everybody seems to think Kingston is the be all of Jamaica, and it isn't.
My fault.
I'm from Clarendon.
True. Clarendon,
which is south central of Jamaica, and everybody considers it country. Oh, so well. I'm from country. I'm from Clarendon. I'm a yard girl.
Okay, so Jamaica or Canada, country-wise?
Ooh.
I've not been to Jamaica. I need to. That's on my list as well. Let me know. I want to know what everybody else out there thinks Toronto. As well.
That has to happen before Toronto. Listen,
yeah, I agree.
Jamaica, I'll be the first to say you're going to either love or hate the experience. It's everybody that I've talked to. It's one or two of the extremes, to be honest with you. And it all depends on where you go. If I think about the experiences that I've had so far, there are some pockets of Canada that I love, but I still fundamentally think of and call Jamaica my home because mommy is still there. When I think of the food that I can get there, hands down, Jamaica.
Oh, yeah. Jamaican food over Canadian food all day long. At me. I don't care. All day. 100%. Yep. Daniel McCoy in the house. Greetings from Atlanta. Let me know what you think out there. Hit that like button. David Fennell, looking forward to hearing you today. Sheryll. Look at this. We got all the friends checking in. Scott Chapman. Prime Lending in the house. This is great. Hit that like button. Check in here. Let us know where in the world you are, what company you're with. Carly, checking in from Pittsburgh. Hosea Botley, my good friend from Seattle. Ann Merritt in Chicagoland, checking in here. Sean Luchins, checking in Western Mass.
Nice.
This. Daniel McCoy says Hotel X. Where is that, Dano? Do we know what that? I don't even know. Is that work safe? Where is that, Dano? What are we talking about? Corinne, always enjoy to hear Sheryll's insights. 100%. We will get to it. We'll stop my filibustering shortly here. Derek says Toronto's awesome. All right. All right. Okay. All right. Connecticut in the house. Naran checking in from England. Look at this. If you like Chicago, you'll love Toronto. All right.
Okay.
Toronto is one of the most diverse cities I've visited. They even have a large carnival. Is this true?
It is. I've been here probably 25 years, and I don't think I've never attended Caravana. No. Not to say that it doesn't exist and people don't have fun, but that's not for me. I'm an introvert straight through. There are times when I have to be in the zone for that, but I love to see it because it's really a coming together of how people, I think for us Caribbeans identify a lot through music and the various genres of music. Like for the last couple weekends, I've been going to, and I've gone more than once, the Bob Marley immersive experience downtown Toronto. And let me tell you, I am dancing from the moment I enter that door to the minute I leave. It's just everything Bob Marley. Beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. Richard's saying daft question here. Richard, we love your daft questions. Keep them coming. How American is Toronto? And this is coming from a Londoner too. So this isn't just my American-centric point of view here. This sounds like an American question, not a daft question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I might want you to expand on that. Are you thinking from a culture perspective, or, you expand on it. I won't presume what you want me to answer. So tell me what you're thinking about.
Presumptuousness. I'm sorry, Jana. Can you put that in the comments how to say that word? Is actually my job. So I will say that Richard is saying, how similar is it to say a New York, let's say, or a Chicago? Is it going to feel like an American city when you're there?
Not instinctively, no. And I mean, I'll use New York as a prime example. New York, you feel it. There's a visceral feeling that you get in New York that I think is somewhat different than you get in Toronto. But I think from a culture perspective, or the vibe that you can get in certain pockets within Toronto, yeah, it mirrors, but it's not identical. You'll definitely know that you're not in New York. I mean, no one's paying $22 for a cup of US Open juice at this point in time.
Taking shots at the US Open. Here we go. We're getting controversial already. We're getting into it. All right, let's talk a little bit about the IDEA task force. I want to hear about this. I've heard about this task force for a while, and I would love for you to kind of tell people what is the idea behind the IDEA task force.
Right, great question. So it's the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity in Action Task Force, and pun intended, it was really brewing pre-2020 with members of the association. And I have to give, complete shout out to Doriana Zohill Morton. She had some of the inception conversations with Peggy Smith prior to Lynn joining. And then I think by about August of 2020, with the events that were happening, there was seriously a pressing need, I guess, to be more visible advocates for intentional change, certainly at the association level. So a bit of the why the task force was formed was, based on the premise that I think for us in this industry, we can't survive without the movement of individuals, right?
Right.
And then sadly, a number of the individuals that get to move don't necessarily look like me. So a lot of underrepresented backgrounds aren't afforded the same privilege of career progression or development that mobility is often a vehicle of. And then through organically having conversations around that, we did see that there were some gaps as well, too, in the supply chain diversity. And we wanted to have a fulsome way of having a task force to address some of those conversations. In whole or in part, we just wanted to amplify and create that awareness. So at the time that the task force, and stop me if you want me, if you got any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I want to just clarify something here. So it sounds like there's kind of a two-prong approach or two-prong objective, right? It's to get more diversity within the mobile population, as well as to get more diversity within and inclusion and everything within the supplier, i.e. the mobility community, the industry.
Correct, because I think we could all argue that the ecosystem is a bit one-sided, and that could either be patriarchal or there are just some services that aren't really supportive of the demographic that we are trying to mobilize. So I think we wanted to certainly create awareness around those conversations and see how we could think of doing things differently, or at least start or spark a conversation about what needs to be those considerations when we're talking about mobility and inclusion in an intentional way.
Yeah. And I want to actually open this up also to the audience to get involved. So we're talking kind of about two things in parallel here. What ideas do you have out there around ways that we can make our ecosystem, the industry, more inclusive, and ways that we can increase the opportunities for mobile employees of different types of diversity? And we'll probably get into different types of diversity, especially when you start thinking globally, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an area of opportunity, I think, for me and my understanding too, because I come at it from a very American, angle, which is to kind of look at color, to look at gender,
Yeah,
to look
but
at
diversity
religion.
is,
Those are the kind of
yeah,
things I look at.
and diversity is a bit more than that. But you're absolutely
Right.
right. I think there are, certainly there are nuanced dimensions of that diversity, and we can certainly go down another intersection conversation about that intersectionality, because I could identify as a cisgender, but I may also have other tenets of diversity that makes me one individual. And those are the things I think that we need to be more mindful of. And I've certainly been educating myself in this space to become more mindful of those scenarios. So it's kind of what we drive in the conversations around, or in the task force. We have about 11, and I know you want to get some questions in on what everyone else wants to talk about, and I'd appreciate that. But just for context, right now we've got our current demographics are about 11 members, and I love data. So 27% are male, 72% female. The reality, though, of it is that a majority of our population sits in North and South America, and one person in Asia Pac. So when I think of the association itself, I think there is a call to action that we need to have certainly a more global and diverse representation of where our task force members can sit. But I don't want to speak out of turn, because this is my last year as chair of the task force. But I'm certainly conscious of the fact that the association wants to do more things with respect to DEIB. So I'm certainly hoping that individuals who are part of the association look for those opportunities to get engaged and be advocates for change.
Yeah, I love that. And let's make that a call to action right now. If you want to get involved, get in the comments, express that interest. Also, if you have ideas, I see Corinne over here. Put your ideas in the comments. If you have thoughts around how we can make this a more inclusive and diverse industry here. Corinne has a comment here. She says, education of students entering the workforce. Under-resourced students typically don't have the same type of exposure to mobility resources in their sphere of influence. Letting students know of the possibilities so they can advocate for themselves when negotiating job offers.
Absolutely true. And I think, we get hung up sometimes in just thinking about solving the issue at the corporate level. But if we think about the upskilling or the lack thereof that has happened over the last 2 years with or individuals in school, and you've got a myriad of students who've had very different experiences and are probably looking for what could be purpose-led work. Mobility is purpose-led work, but we're not amplifying mobility experience or mobility as a career at that level. And those are certainly opportunities for those internships that Corinne talked about.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I love, I love when we crowdsource stuff. You never know what you're going to get. Erica, what's up? She says, go to the brown communities. Erica, what does that mean to you? I want to hear more about this concept here. What does that mean to you, Sheryll?
I'm going to go on a limb that's more US centric than I imagine. So I don't, again, want to say the wrong thing.
You're right. That's my fault. Wild speculation is my job. I think this is when we look at inside of our companies, when we look at talent inside of our companies, there's how do we get folks in the door? How do we get them up the ladder? And how do we get them feeling good about where they're at? And I feel like these are three different strategies. So this is an in the door solution, in my opinion.
Very. But it's a valid point that Eric has raised. So, if I think about it, and I'm going to go on a soapbox here for a nanosecond.
Do it.
I think every organization will probably tell you that they hire diversely, but I think they're mistaken. So the issue not necessarily is it's threefold. You still have to tackle the issue of diversity and how you hire. But even if you hire diverse talent, are you then making them feel included? Are you then are you dismantling the systemic barriers that are not allowing them to have that space of inclusion? Are you getting past the middle management rung for some individuals? Are you looking at underrepresented talent in a much different way? Or is bias spearheading many of the ways in which you either work or train with them? And I think those are nuances that we still have yet to unpack. And it's all well and good that we want to fix the issue and hire, but we have seen hiring targets not being met. We've seen false advertising of hiring from certain underrepresented communities. And that just further, amplifies that there are systemic issues that we need to start dismantling when it comes to the hiring of diverse talent in a way that it's intentional. So not tokenism, not as a quota, but intended to make them feel included.
That was going to be my next question, is how do we balance targets and tokenism? You thought this was going to be fluffy. You thought it was going to be easy questions.
No. It's a good question. And I don't think we ever have the answer for it, but that's more of I would think that's an internal or culture dynamic, right? So if you as an organization say that you want to have a culture that is performative, then yes, you will have tokenism. But if you are saying that you want to do more than lip service and hire intentionally, and then make the right career progressions, targets, measurements, accountability for people who don't predominantly look like the majority, then that will start to look different. I think right now we are in a weird blend of the two, but I would say I would prefer to be a target number versus a quota number.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you say, targets versus quotas. I would like to think if we removed some of the bias from our hiring process, like if we started, redacting resume names, if we started not involving photos as much, right? If we started doing like these other things, and then we also went to the brown communities or, HSBCs, or if we started like kind of diversifying where we showed up in our recruitment.
Right.
I think a confluence of those actions might naturally get us closer to being representative without necessarily setting a target out there, because I'm a numbers guy, right? You give me a number, I'm gonna try to hit it, but am I gonna hit it the right way? Am I going to do it, to do it in a way that's, I feel like tokenism starts to creep in with the targets.
And it's a fair point. But in answer to your question, or part of the thought that's coming up from your point just now, is the bias is unconscious. So I don't know if you can dismantle it immediately, but I think there's certainly opportunities for us to consider what are we asking for when we hire talent. And one of the key things, and it probably goes back a bit to the point of upskilling, is experience. I think we have a very strong bias about what experience looks like or what leadership should look like. And that sometimes inherently drives how we hire and where we hire from. And I think if you start unpacking those, you may start to see the representation look differently. But one foot is still on the soapbox. It doesn't matter if you hire differently if you have me sit here and do nothing, right? So I think an organization really has to be crystal clear that because you have to understand, I guess, the view that I'm holding, your experience still drives how you work, and it drives your professional and or personal lived experience at work. If an organization isn't agile enough to adapt to that, you will probably have someone who is disengaged. And I know we'll probably end up talking about quiet quitting soon enough.
Yeah, I want to get into that.
Let's hopefully we'll finish before we get to that. But fundamentally, I think we need to start thinking about the human behind that hire, right? And sometimes I think there's a disconnect between what's actually required of the role versus the practicality versus what goes out on the job description. And I don't think we've actually redesigned job descriptions to fundamentally ask the question, in this environment, post-COVID, what are we actually wanting individuals to do? Does the job requirement, has it stayed the same pre or post? And if it has not, then I think we owe it to ourselves to start redesigning the way in which we think of work, which is now way more dynamic than it was 3 years ago, and invest in finding the right individuals to support what your organization is looking for. You'll notice that I was intentional in not using the word fit.
See, okay. All right. So this is really interesting. So I love that. Oh gosh, you're going so many different directions here. I love that we're talking about redesigning the job description, right? Because on the recruitment side, I mean, we deal a lot in the recruitment piece, right? And so many job descriptions are just cut and paste from the one previously, right? And it's been the same way for 10, 20. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, the bottom half, there's a whole laundry list of stuff that goes on every one that's like, is that necessary? Is that even a thing? Whatever. The other side of it is too, we deal with hiring managers that are not trained in hiring. Right. And so, I mean, you want to talk about unconscious and conscious biases just running wild, right? When these people aren't even trained to recognize and put in these countermeasures against these biases. I mean, it's funny, like the things they don't teach you in school, right? The things they don't teach you in, business class, right? They don't teach you how to interview someone in a way that's unbiased. Right? How to use structured interviews, how to use the same questions, how to use scorecards, how to use, all the stuff. Right. And so I think there's a huge opportunity as well. I'd love to know what everyone else out there thinks. We got a ton of comments coming in. Can we get some of these comments here, Sheryll? You up for some of that?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Richard. Sounds good. Check it out. Leave some comments when you get back here. Erica's got some more. Oh gosh, this is good about how do we get people in the room. She's saying we can invite folks to regional meetings for exposure. Can we reach out to communities and to young people who are still in high school, college, and start exposing them to the global mobility industry, mentoring, interning, whatever you want to call it, inviting them locally? Because, going out to Vegas for a conference in the middle of the first semester of your whatever is tough, right? But you could invite them to the local CRC meeting or the local,
So shameless plug, and I know Corinne will probably have more to talk about on that for some of the intern work that she's doing, so certainly reach out to her. But over the last few months, we actually partnered with Upward Mobility. So that's Andrew Walker's group. Yeah. And we had a bunch of cohorts that were university or onwards university students who have been afforded intern opportunities, and we socialize them to what the idea Taskforce was. And it's a similar concept, getting them to understand that there's more to the world. Mind you, they worked or they continue to do some work in various parts of the service partner space, but we wanted to get them thinking about mobility in a much more organic way, and also the inclusion piece that they need to think of. So I think you're absolutely right. There is an opportunity for us to figure out, how do we decrease the barriers for individuals to come into this space? And I can't help but think about my own trajectory. Mad stories, but I hustled my who to do every single thing related to mobility because it mattered to me. Is that everyone's experience? Certainly not. And I think those are the things that we also have to recognize, that not everybody has the same privilege and or experience as another person. But I certainly think that there's an opportunity, that there seems to be a call to action to say, how do we start to think of having more engagement and mentorship opportunities? That way we can bring someone to one of these events or to the local events that occur to bring them into this space. But I think we have to be very careful, again, that we're not just doing it to be performative. We have to be having intentional conversations about why we want to mentor somebody. And if you're only doing it for the purpose of doing it, then I challenge you not to. Because mentorship is a hard relationship to maintain, and you have to be doing it for the right reasons, in my opinion.
And I think you need to kind of know how to be a mentor also.
1000%.
Jason Maciet says the problem is employers not understanding what unconscious bias is. Yeah, that's a big problem. What do you think, Sheryll?
Valid point. So I'll never say I don't agree. It's a valid point because that's Jason's point. I think what I'm sensitive to, and this probably goes back to that mind map that I was telling you that I was going through around benign neglect, right? So challenge my assumption here, because I don't for a second know US history to the extent that I think that you all do. But there was a period, probably about 55 years or so ago, civil rights movement era, where there was the view that intentionally or focusing on racial tension actually stoked the issues themselves, right? So the whole principle at the time was, or the view at the time was, you have to ignore the issue. So you start with this concept of benign neglect. If you ignore the issue, it goes away. And part of me thinks in some shape or form that has socialized how we don't even recognize the biases that show up. So if I think of one really interesting one that has come up in the space of remote work is the distance bias. And I think you start to see it show up more with people saying, well, I need to see you in the office, or I need you to be present for you to have the same experiences with senior leadership versus someone who opts to work remotely. But unless you call it out, I mean, it's unconscious for a reason. You don't recognize that it's happening. Right. But I think what we are, in a simpler way, what has been working for me is to ask myself every time I show up for a conversation, do I have enough information about this individual or this scenario to make an uninformed, ideally unbiased opinion? And that may very well look like I'm going to go to the Google machine and I'm going to start looking stuff up because I want to be crystal clear that I am educating myself on the way in which I show up, that I'm not exhibiting or continuing to perpetrate a bias. That's not everybody's experience because you're just in the moment and you want to do things. But I think we certainly have an opportunity to look in the mirror every time that we're having these conversations and ask ourselves, does this work for the population that we're intending to hire? And I'll use one example of ableism. I went down a very terrible rabbit hole on Instagram, don't ask. But somebody asked a question about a cover letter. So I, in my infinite wisdom, said, are cover letters really still required? Like why do we think the process of putting something on a paper is still required? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not required. I'm asking if it's something that we've always done, have we yet asked the question, is it still relevant? Somehow that launched into a conversation around ableism. And the role was for a retail role. And I said, we seem to have this innate thought that everyone can see, hear, walk, and move in the same way that the next person can. And the reality of it is that is not the case. People don't process information the same way. People don't live the same way. But inherently, we have this huge ableism bias that we still have yet to unpack. And if we can't even unpack that, then it's hard to imagine how we can even start to unpack the other pieces of bias to do the work that is intended to be done. But
well, that's a really good example. I mean, I think ableism, and define ableism for people out there.
It's just that we live and experience a world where we're able to be completely mobile. And by mobile, I have 2 feet, I can walk, I have 2 hands that allows me to do things. I can see, I can hear without barriers. That isn't the experience for other people. And I think we live in a world, and let's ask the question. If you were to think of your mobile population, how many of them can you actually think of or quantify that required an assistive device, or that you have an assistive type technology to support their mobility? And I know we're using mobility interchangeably here.
Yeah, right.
Right. Here's a thought. We live
your assignees. How many of your assignees are otherwise abled or are disabled or have a disability?
Correct.
Correct. I think it's a great point. I mean, how many employees in general? It was interesting. We were actually recruiting I think it was global payroll specialist for a company, and we didn't know until we got on the screening that she was hearing impaired, and so she had an interpreter, and the interview went great, but it was our first time screening out of hundreds of people. It was our first time screening someone who had that disability. And so really, really interesting.
And it's a learning for all of us. And I think probably the easiest way to think about it is think about the people that you never invite to a meeting, the people that never normally sit with you at a table. Those are probably the individuals that you're intentionally or maybe unintentionally, so that unconscious bias, stepping away from. Those are sometimes, I think, the aha moments where you have to then check yourself to say, am I being as inclusive as I think I am being? And trust me, I have had to challenge my own biases as well. My biggest one is expectation bias. We don't have enough time for that, but just keep going.
You can't keep doing that to me. You can't keep just lobbing these amazing thought bombs into the conversation. Like, don't even get me started about expectation bias. Like, I need to know about.
We can talk about this in Las Vegas.
All right. Sounds good. We got people coming in, and I want to actually get to that topic actually about who we sit at the table with. We got people chiming in here. Natalie saying, I also think we need to understand it is not a program you roll out, but rather a journey that we
1000%.
go on. Do you agree with that frame?
I absolutely do. And the beauty behind that statement or the thought is that journey is evolving as you go. So I think one of the hiccups that we put ourselves in is that we have to have and I recognize in saying target is that we think we need to have an end goal. That end goal may keep moving because as we continue to evolve in this space, the way in which people are asking to show up, or they're asking to define their belonging, or they're even asking to identify themselves, that will continue to shift. So that journey itself continues to go. And as the employee moves through that life cycle, that journey itself continues to shift. So absolutely spot on comment.
Yeah. And I what I love about this too is
Natalie's a yard girl.
Yeah, she is, right? She is from Jamaica, isn't she? And what I like about this too is that it shows that the work is never done.
Correct.
And none of us are perfect. Our assumptions that are baked into this as well.
Right. And I think there's probably a learning in that as well too, is that the journey isn't just for the individual that's on the opposite side. The journey is for ourselves as well, right? And you can't grow if you stand in the same space. Simon Sinek said it, I think, that we're probably the least evolved species. And sometimes I think he's correct because we fear that growth and we fear that journey. And the assumption is that change happens, but I don't have to be impacted by that change, when that's a complete fallacy. The change is twofold, and we both have to go through that experience to understand each other.
Getting a phone call in the middle of the show. This happens. So I can't take it. It's the camera. The camera's ringing. This is the world we live in now. The camera's ring. Just a thought. Don't even get me started on the camera's ring. Okay.
You'll have to tell me about it in Vegas.
Yeah, I'll tell you about it in Vegas. Okay. The camera's ring. Okay. And saying agree. Hi, what's up? What up? Corinne saying, even with robust policies, some EEs don't know how to use those benefits. For example, if every generation of their family is rented, do they have financial literacy to be in a position to purchase a home? Adding some supports into the policy to meet people where they are.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought on that, Corinne, because we've tried to have, we've started some conversations within the task force about that very same issue, right? Because we do see the distinction between homeowners versus renters. And I think we often forget that not everybody, and sometimes some people are taking a significant pay cut, or they're moving to a single income household by virtue of taking an assignment or a relocation. But I don't think we solve for that, right? But we seem to have this challenge in talking to individuals about their finances. And I'm not sure what drives that, right? But it's interesting because socioeconomic status is one of the huge dimensions of diversity that sets us apart from the other, but it's the one thing that we refuse to talk about.
Well, it reminds me of what you said before about we were taught to like not address problems and then they might go away, and I think that we were always taught, I mean, yeah, I shouldn't say that, but it's a commonly held belief that you don't talk about pay, income, things like that. In fact, companies, I've worked at companies where it was a policy in the handbook that people weren't supposed to talk about it.
Right.
Not even sure if that's legal or not.
No.
But now we're seeing studies that show that millennials are way more open about their pay and their income, and actually it has a positive effect on their income. Now people don't know that we do a show at 4:00 Eastern. They call me on the camera. It starts messing me up. I can't even stop it because it's the camera.
That's okay.
Oh, the people. Anyway, so
it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Yeah,
and that's maybe something that we challenge ourselves to talk about in the industry, is when we're having conversations with or mobile population. Because I remember there was this one story about an assignee, and they were less than pleased about the way in which the move was going 3 months or 4 months into actually arriving in the host location. And then by the time you peel back all the layers of it, it really boiled down to they were strapped for cash, but didn't know how to ask for it because they had a certain standard of living. And even when you think about the fact that someone moves to the Americas region, and the first comment you'll hear from a majority of them is, we don't use credit the same way in which the US population does or the North American population does. But the expectation is that for them to remain soluble, they need to then go on credit. And that's not their experience. That's not what they want to do. But they've already just spent everything to come here. But our system is telling them that they need to build a credit history. And for what it's worth, I recognize that is a valid process right now, but recognize that for some individuals, living or utilizing credit for the day-to-day expenses is not their reality.
Right. Yes. That's so interesting because I know several companies that specialize in finance for expats, and one of the first things they want to do is give them a credit card. Well, that's not what I do. I don't need a credit card. I got a job. I don't need a credit card.
Correct.
But yeah, super interesting. But then of course, without credit, you can't buy a house. You can't do all the other things that you need, right? And so it's like the credit system forces you to partake. Super interesting. I'd never heard anybody bring that part up of it though, too. Dean saying the journey lives, breathes, and truly never ends. Just look at the changing landscape over the past 2 years. Change is constant and needs to be embraced. Sean's got a question about metrics. What are the metrics if you think can be measured? Hit that like button, everybody. Get in the comments. He says, what are the metrics if you think can be measured orgs should use around measuring DE&I? Right now is pay or total reward and percentage of employees. But do you see other ways to help companies measure their movement in the right direction? In my opinion, it can't be done overnight. What do you think, Sheryll?
I am biased to the people analytics space. So I'm more concerned because, listen, if you're asking the right questions for the right reasons, you can get individuals to identify so that you have the basic framework of how diverse is your workforce. At the risk of repeating myself, you can have a diverse workforce, does not necessarily mean that you make them feel included.
Right.
So one of the things that I think the best way to measure inclusion, which I think is probably more critical at this point than it is numbers, is when you think of how distributed our workforce is now, are you leveraging people analytics to say, how is that network actually making someone feel included? Are there certain groups within your organization that have more demographic than another, that has more hierarchy than another, that probably has more females than another? Let's use that as an example. And by that extension, how often does, when a meeting occurs, is that individual able to speak at a meeting? When you think of a group setting, so your groups are like networks, right? So when you think of that network within the organization, does that group have a high history of turnover? Do they have a high history of promotions, progressions? That's where you start to see, because everyone can come in the door. I think we can argue that everyone gets in the door, but what do you do to really measure, are they thriving in the way that you want them to? And I think when you start to think of the metrics in that regard, you get richer insights from the people analytics space than you necessarily do in just tracking the data as to X number of this, X percentage of this. That data is still relevant, but I call to mind that not every region documents or can document diversity data in the same way. So those regional distinctions, in some countries, and don't quote me, I can certainly share the link with you afterwards. In some regions, you cannot record personable identifiable information, and you can't record diversity information. So you probably can't record sex, you can't record race, you can't record even if they need an accommodation. So I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that the collection of data is not universal. So it's understanding when you're building out a global framework or that journey, that you understand where your footprint is and understand the nuances behind each location and what diversity means. Something as simple as the fact that what diversity looks like in the US looks very differently in another location. I want to believe it's a country in Asia Pac where even someone who has identified as a homosexual or has a same-sex relationship, that was at one point considered a mental illness, right?
Mm.
And I think it's those nuances that we have to be very mindful of, that it may be a large impact issue in one location, but it's not the same in another. It's not to say that it's not worth a conversation, because if you think of the mobile population or the fact that you want to create a global workforce, there is a greater call to action that we need to understand what those regional and global distinctions are, such that when we think of our footprint holistically, that we are supporting them wherever they move to or from.
Yeah, super layered there. Sean, I think it's a very interesting question.
Happy to chat.
Yeah, I think that's a long, it might involve like a whiteboard or something where we get the markers out, start jotting some stuff down. I don't know if people still do that stuff anymore. I don't even know. I do. I do too. Maybe we just dated ourselves. I don't know. People have newfangled.
I dated myself a couple of days ago with a typewriter. So
no, what are you doing with a typewriter? It's supposed to sit in the corner and look pretty on a little end table.
Let's not go there.
Oh,
typewriters had their purpose.
What are you in the moving business? So you using typewriters? What are you doing? Bills of lading over here?
When I went to school, we had home ec or something else, and I learned to use a typewriter. That thing was the bee's knees. And then when you got the whiteout,
yeah.
That was fun.
My gosh!
I know. I just dated myself, but that's okay.
I love it. I did learn on a word processor myself, which was like a hybrid typewriter / not computer, but you plugged it in, but it wasn't a computer. You know,
it was Brother, right? The brand was Brother.
Something like it was like that gray tan color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Sean says I think the term's discussion for another day. There you go. This, we could go on and on.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time, and I'm probably going to get more calls on my camera. But we got a little underrated, overrated here.
Okay.
Because we like to have fun. We're going to do a lightning round. Jana, producer Jana in the house here. Do we have our overrated, underrated queued up, Jana?
God, I can't remember what I said now.
Doesn't matter. Just shoot from the hip. Doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what you say. I'm going to tell you if you're right or wrong. Okay. All the equity goes out the window when we do overrated, underrated. It's my way or the highway around here. Reading nonfiction, overrated or underrated?
Reading nonfiction, underrated.
Okay. Who is it, underrated? Yeah, it's underrated. Give me an example though of what genre of nonfiction you're talking about. IKEA manuals. What are we reading over here?
Wow.
Self-help, business books, chicken soup for the soul. What are we reading?
Business books.
Yeah.
I have about 20 different books that I have on rotation. The interesting one that I've been reading now is So You Want to Talk About Race. I can't remember the author of it, but that's an interesting one. Then there's The Art of War. And then it's underrated. I think there's an empathy that you can get for the dryness of it. And trust me, I know I'm weird when I say that, but it's underrated.
Empathy and Art of War in the same sentence. Only here on Love and Relo. Hot takes. Next. Silence. Something I should practice more often. Overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Why is that? You can't be silent.
I can be.
I guess you could be. Maybe you just made your point. All right, lightning round. Next. Cheesecake, overrated or underrated?
Listen, that thing needs its own food group. Seriously. I
Well,
love
what would
my
I do with my
cheesecake.
cheese food group and my cake food group if I made cheesecake a food group?
Okay, we gotta talk. But
Where
carry on.
is the best cheesecake?
My kitchen. I make my own.
See, talking about talking. Give me what is the secret ingredient to a good cheesecake, Sheryl?
It is actually doing the steam bath for it, so it minimizes the crack.
Yes. Using a springform pan for that or what? No.
No, I've stopped using a springform a
They
couple of
leak.
years now.
Is it because they leak?
No, not leak. I just didn't like the way in which that opening occurred and how it made the cake rest. So I've used a different pan now for it that I've had some good success with.
All right, I need a link to this pan because this is what stands between me and cheesecake greatness right now is this pan you're alluding to. Do we have another one? Job titles, overrated or underrated?
Overrated.
Overrated. State your case.
I think we okay. So I'll speak from a personal experience. I don't identify. I love my job. I love every single organization that I've worked for. But if I could think of the fact that I do purpose-led work every single time, I don't think it necessarily matters what title I have. I think we've traditionally lived on a hierarchical system where titles mattered, and that's how you introduced yourself. So when I think of the fact that there's some individuals who never get to that space of having a title that we have a bias against, we're excluding them. So from that conversation lens is how do you embrace someone for who they are, from where they are, for what they do, not what their title says.
All right. I'm going to challenge you on this.
Okay.
I'm not going to say they're underrated because I can't do that. But I will say it's one of those things like when you have it, it's not important, but not having it is important. Okay, because you're over here like this is a title. Everybody I've heard that says titles don't matter have a great title. Okay, everybody I know like they've reached the mountaintop, looked around, and were like, you know what? It's pretty much the same as it was down there. But people down there are like, oh my gosh, how do I get to the top of the mountain? You've been there. Teach me your ways. You know, Sean is saying amen on job titles. Sean, what's your job title? I bet it's sick. I bet it's a sick job title. All these people, job titles don't mean nothing.
Wow.
That's my take on it. You know what? This is a lightning round. Last one.
Okay. Last one. Speed.
Overrated or underrated? We talking about the movie? Are we talking about
yeah, if we're talking about my driving in particular.
You're driving.
It's underrated.
So does that mean that you think you should go faster than maybe?
Let me tell you, and I know I'm going to lose a few brownie points here, but let me give you a quick story. So we have the 407, it's a toll highway, right? So I'm going for an exercise to an event, and it just dawned on me that there are no speed limit posts on the toll booth. So I'm like, okay, so what speed should I be going? Is it 100 kms? Is it more? So then I was talking to an engineer, and of course, you know, engineers got to use that title, but they love to show you up. So I made the comment, I said, okay, so if they tag me at the toll X and I end here, how do they know what speed I'm going? So she says, do you remember that math question you used to get asked when it says, if you start at point A and point B?
Yes, yes.
So on average, I got a left foot. Just gonna call it.
Left foot. You know, I think I'm going to challenge this one as well. Is speeding as much fun if there is no posted limit?
Absolutely.
I kind of like going over and knowing I'm going over, to be honest with you. Sean actually got a new title. I stand corrected. Sean's new title is Ben's Lackey, apparently. Yeah, we run a real inclusive and equitable organization here. We give out titles that just really, you know, we don't recycle any old titles. We come up with exactly what you do for a living, and that's what we call you. But you know what? But Jason's got a point, Sean. Just because you got that great title doesn't mean you're qualified for the job, Sean. So I gotta
rewrite the job description, Jason.
That's it. One of my favorite things is using people's comments out of context. Natalie says this has been great. This is fun. Sheryll, I've had a blast with you. Really enjoyed it. Want to ask you, do you want to leave people maybe with just one parting thought?
Challenge yourself to have the uncomfortable conversation. I've had more in the last 2 years than I thought possible, but it has made me more appreciative of the industry that I'm in and of the things that I'm able to be a part of. And I think sometimes we often forget that true art of a conversation, it matters. It's inclusive. It brings people together. It drives different perspectives. And I think if we really want to understand each other, that's a starting point. And those conversations are hard, but they're certainly worth it once you get through it.
Couldn't agree more. Fantastic. Thank you for leaving us with that wisdom, those insights, making us think a little differently. I second what Jana says here. Corinne, thanks for everybody out there watching and being a part of this. We wouldn't have a show if you weren't watching. So hit that like button. Appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much, Sheryll Young, Idea Task Force Chair for WERC. Appreciate you. People are loving it, chiming in left and right. This is fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And we will see y'all next week. Take care, everybody.